Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey Mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
If you've been in the hobby for more than a day, then you know how fast the sports card market moves. There are now more options than ever to buy, sell, and research your cards. One of the most frustrating hurdles in the hobby is the fees when selling your cards. You know, those other popular marketplaces, the ones with their average seller transaction fee of 10%, the ones that don't have the seller's interest in mind. Wait, what? Who would do that? Well, hold on to your horses. No, not those horses. Welcome to the Card Flip, a place where we want to provide a simple alternative to buying and selling cards. No clutter, just you, graded cards, sealed wax, and the easiest of transactions. So what do you say? Are you in? Great! Welcome to the Card Flip, the seller's marketplace.
Yo, and hello everybody. Mike Moynihan here, and this is another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. I'm your host today and every week, but I just wanted to come on today and do an episode about what's going on in this sports card market and taking it from a vintage perspective. I think that's really important because we see a lot of stuff about modern, ultra modern, etc., and pop reports, and we hear all this crap, but what's really going on in the vintage market? And let me tell you, I did some kind of just personal research, personal homework, and the results were both surprising and not surprising. And I'm going to get into that. But again, I don't like to do things by myself. So let me bring on my guest in just a second. Let me mention a couple things. Hey, Nationals around the corner, and I'm going to be having some special episodes as we gear up for the National, talking about vintage and the National and all of that. Have some guests on to discuss that. And Hobbypalooza is coming up. Last year was so awesome. It was so great. And we are going to be doing that again in July. In fact, July 10th and 11th to be exact. A Saturday and a Sunday. We may even have some preview stuff on the 9th. Time will tell. The lineup is coming together great. I'm really excited about who all is going to be there. In fact, my guest tonight is going to be one of the channels hosting an hour of Hobbypalooza. Without further ado, let me bring him on right now. And it's George from Diamond Yard Sports Cards. George, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, good, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. This should be a lot of fun talking about vintage and all the changes, the roller coaster, and looking forward to Hobbypalooza as well. Thank you. And Bench Clear for putting that together again. It should be a great time as well.
It will be. You were my guest last year on Hobbypalooza. Mm-hmm. And now you got your own. You must have done so well that they've offered you an hour of airtime for yourself. How cool is that?
Yeah, I really had to lobby. I was lobbying, and finally they broke through. So I really appreciate that.
If only you knew somebody at Bench Clear that could have paved the way for you.
That's true. You're right. So now we're looking about topics, talking to a couple guys today, and
nice.
Anyway, I'll talk about that later. But this is going to be exciting, talking about how things have gone up and down and why they have, and what to look for and what you look for. And I'm excited to talk about the cards that you were referring to in your own personal collection.
Yeah. So maybe let me set this up a little bit. And how I got here to do this episode is I was looking at eBay, as I often do, and I was looking for cards actually that I was looking to buy, and surprised at some of the prices. And then I would go and look at that price of what that card was going for, pick your card, and I'd look at VCP, and then I'd look at past eBay sales and all sorts of stuff, and I'm going, wow, these cards are much lower than they were not too long ago. And So then I started doing some homework and some real research on cards that I own and what their kind of peak price was and what their current price is. And the results were pretty striking to me. Not that either one of us is surprised. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But no, everybody knows that's listening to this knows that the hobby has been booming. The card market has been flourishing over the last 16 months, 18 months. Where do you think we are, George? Like, what are your just initial thoughts about the vintage market and what's going on?
I think it really depends on what you're trying to buy. I think it really depends on what, in general, I can say, yeah, things hit a peak there in February. I would say that it's not time to panic or anything like that. I think that people like you and I who've been in the hobby for a long time, and even in graded cards, I've been doing graded cards since about 2005. And I wouldn't say there's no panic. It's just a matter of like some things are going down, other things are going up, and at least in some of the stuff that I'm watching. So I know, but as a general rule right now, yeah, it would be, if you got in February and you had a lot of money in February and you just dumped it all into sports cards, you'd be hurting right now. But I think it's cyclical, and frankly, from my perspective, watching the hobby over the years, it always peaks in February. I don't have data or things to show, but in my experience, the best deals are to be had in October, November, and December. And then when people it starts percolating with the hobby, I'm not talking about just the boom here. I'm talking about going back, 2015, 2010, 2005. Things seem to go up when people get excited about spring training. There's tax return money out there. And then people spend more money and the cards kind of take a step up. And they might stay there or they might not. But now what we've seen, though, is we've just all discussed this hyperbolic growth that we know is frankly not sustainable. Even if you're buying Babe Ruths, it's not sustainable in my opinion.
Yeah. Every market of every type of asset, commodity, whatever you want to call it, has cyclical periods. Stock market does, housing, cryptocurrency. Look what crypto's done over the last, couple of months. So this always happens. Things can't go up forever. They just don't. And none of us knew kind of when that tide would turn. The reality of it is, and my opinion is that I'm going to take tonight and prove it a little bit, is I think we're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of that tide turning. The hard thing about when the tides turn is you don't know when it's done. You don't know how far things will go down on a stock or the market itself or housing, you name it. Where's the bottom? Because if you're collectors like us, all I think about, I want to be a bottom feeder. I want to be, the Warren Buffett style of card collecting where you buy when there's blood on the streets. That's the kind of collector I want to be because I'm playing the long game. I don't care. I would buy every card for $1. I've said this multiple times on podcasts and videos. I don't care. I want them to have some value. I don't want them to be worthless, but at the same time, I don't do it for the money. And I know you have a similar mindset in terms of how you collect. Where do you think we are in that cycle?
Well, I think it fluctuates. I know things are going down a little bit because again, they were so high to begin with. And if you've been in the hobby at all and you've watched, let's say, for example, Hall of Famers, whether it's Mantle or Mays or Aaron or Robinson, and you're saying to yourself, wow, a PSA 2 of a 1953 Jackie Robinson is suddenly going for like $1,200. The card could be had for $250 only maybe a year and a half ago. So, and I understand that in the modern market, there's just crazy, growth. But I still think that, it's not a time to stop buying the cards that are the best cards in their grade. And I think that a lot of the values, it's not apples to apples when you're talking about vintage cards. and I know you know this, Mike, and the audience knows this too. It's not apples to apples. If not every 1960 Hank Aaron in a PSA 5 is the same, and the higher you go up in the grade scale, the more consistency we hope there is. But one card might sell for $200, one might sell for $400. It's incredibly different. And I think if we don't have that kind of context to it, we can say, boy, this is taking a precipitous drop. But it depends on the card and how nice that vintage card is, regardless of the grade.
Totally agree. God, I had a question. I need to write these things down. I'd be a much better host.
I got some notes here, but it's kind of funny too. I was looking at we call it the hobby, right? What's the definition of a hobby? And so just an activity done in one's leisure time for pleasure. And it started off like that for a lot of us, especially the vintage collectors and the older, we were busting wax and stuff like that at a young age. And it's kind of like you try to balance, like you had said, now you're older, you're buying things that are maybe more expensive card wise than you ever were. I might have thought twice 6 years ago about buying a card for $400. And now I'm like, well, I think it's I'm not going to find another one, or I'll buy it, whatever. So I think that there's a balance there between, there's a hobby, and there's also the fact that I think it's a fiction to say, well, I don't care if it all goes away and it's worth nothing. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, you spent your time on it, you've spent your money on it. Not that I'm looking to have my cards be worth, I'm not going to retire on this stuff, but it's nice to see there's an increase. And so when there's a blip and things start going down like they are now, I think it's good to put some perspective on it, that this is a cycle, like you'd said.
Yeah. And again, everything goes through those cycles. I always say the only person that gets hurt on a roller coaster is one who jumps off. Right. And
yeah,
when you're in this cycle, in this period, it's important to maintain perspective, like you just brought to it, defining what a hobby is. And I truly believe this is a hobby. It's great that there's money in it. I think that's just an added bonus to the hobby part of it. I think it's simply a byproduct, ancillary benefit of being in the hobby that we're in, that, oh, by the way, if you needed to sell them, you could get real money for pictures of dudes from 100 years ago. That's a pretty cool thing. And I've always said it, cards to me are not investments. They have no intrinsic value in and of themselves. They're only worth what someone is willing to pay for them. And right now we're seeing people willing to spend less money. Do you think in the vintage market, what would you say would be kind of some major contributing factors to the hyperbolic rise, especially in the vintage world? Because I believe that vintage has long been overlooked, maybe underappreciated, undervalued. Any of those superlatives that you want to use would apply, I think. And now I think it was finally getting its due, right? Okay, vintage is, Mickey Mantle should be worth more than a Ronald Acuna, or, name your old player, name your new player. And I think that was finally starting to happen. But and I keep asking you a question and then talking. That's not very nice of me. It's supposed to be a discussion show, not an interview. But anyway, the question I want to ask you and have you weigh in on is, what were the causes? Do you think the same as what caused all sports cars to rise, or is it something specific about vintage that finally made it because it came in late into the game, right? I think in the sports card game. Contributing factors, what do you think?
Well, I mean, for example, what it is not the modern, ultra modern market. It is not. There aren't a whole lot of flippers in the market of vintage, and so you don't see people. I mean, if you're trying to flip vintage, you're in for a rude awakening. Now, recently you might have been able to do it with some success, but like you were saying, it's a long game. So the contributing factors, obviously, COVID and people reflecting on the past. Now, vintage, the desire, or the attraction of vintage is going to be the nostalgia. That's the attraction of vintage, and then the history. If you're into history, I mean, I'm sure almost everybody who collects vintage is either a lover of art, a lover of history, or very nostalgic, or all three. And those three factors, nostalgia you don't hear a bad thing about nostalgia. The connotation of nostalgia is a positive thing.
Warm and fuzzies, right?
Yeah, and it's an affection. It's you know, it's you have a happy personal association with nostalgia, and so that grew during COVID. I'm just talking my opinion psychologically about what went on is that grew during COVID, and people started to reflect more on their lives, what was important, who they shared time with. And if you were a card collector, you really enjoyed that, looking back at those times. And if you were a card collector and got out of the hobby, you maybe got back in. And I think a lot of people have got back into the hobby after reflecting on these things. So I think that's one element of it. I mean, obviously you can say, oh, COVID, but I mean, like, what did COVID make people do? It made people reflect on things, reflect on the meaning of their lives and the meaning of their hobbies and the meaning of the way they spend their time. And so that, I think, brought the card market back in a lot of ways, especially the vintage card market, because people were reflecting on time they spent with their dad, their grandfather, their friends when they grew up. The second thing, obviously, is the financial stimulus. Some people got financial stimulus, some people didn't. And that stimulus, that money, you're in the financial world, Mike, there's more of it out there. And so it's easier for people to spend money. And that correlates with the February spike. People got another stimulus check in February, and it was a big one. And so then at that point, that combined with tax returns is double money at the same time of year that cards typically go up. And so then that, is part of it as well. And then the third thing, obviously, is people were investing and still are in these fractional ownership groups. I can't buy, me personally, I can't buy, I have a 1933 Gaudi Babe Ruth, and it's in a PSA 1 because I couldn't afford to buy a 5. I couldn't, so I just kept looking at the lower end of the grading scale. And I bought the card 3-4 years ago. But I mean, now you can buy that fractional ownership, as and a lot of the guests on your, that. And that's a big player in it too. Not only do you have the extra money coming from, Joe and, George and Mike, but the extra money coming from these fractional ownership groups that have millions of dollars, and they're buying these cards up. So I think those three components have a lot to do with that.
You spoke about the nostalgia, and I've had people ask me this question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for it, but it's an interesting question to pose and to ponder. And that is the nostalgia part. For example, I love buying Mickey Mantle cards. I never watched Mickey Mantle play, never saw him. I never heard stories from my father or grandfather about Mickey Mantle. Why? And this is maybe rhetorical. Why do I have such a love for those? And you could pick any of them, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and Sandy, all these guys that I never saw play. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig is my favorite player of all time. Never seen him play.
Well, and yet, I think anybody who knows me knows I'll try to answer any question.
Please answer it, or try to help me understand what's wrong with my brain where I have this affinity and true passion and love for these cards of guys I've never seen play.
My sons have never seen the Beatles, and I never saw the Beatles. My mom listened to them, and they were playing in our house all the time. And this could apply to the Beatles. This could apply to Hank Williams Jr., Hank Williams Sr., whatever. But they just kind of seep into your consciousness, and you hear about these people, and they're just people you are around, talk about them, listen to their records. Baseball, you're around baseball, right? Your whole life. Your dad's involved as a cameraman, I believe.
Yep.
And it just kind of seeps into who you are and what your DNA is. And then you start taking an interest in it. But I understand it too. I never saw these guys. I never saw Jackie Robinson. Feel fortunate. I saw Tony Gwynn, Rod Carew, Nolan Ryan. But for some reason, the guys who you didn't see him play seem more mystical.
It's maybe mystical, romanticized. And it's a lot like, like people talk about when you want Ken Burns baseball about New York in the 50s, sure,
and the three great outfielders, 3 great teams. And it just creates this magic. And you hear these older people talk about it, whether it's Billy Crystal or whoever. And then you listen to Buck O'Neill on the Ken Burns Buck O'Neill at any time, but sure. Buck O'Neill talk about the Negro Leagues or talk about Josh Gibson, or when it's just it creates this romanticism in your brain that's already there because you've already been influenced by all these baseball surroundings you've had. So, I mean, I guess that would be my answer, is just like, it's part you, and it's just part of the people you are around, and what influences just trickled down and got into your feelings, soul, heart, mind.
Sure. By the way, Buck O'Neil, probably the person I would say deserves to be in the Hall of Fame the most that is currently not, is Buck O'Neil, by the way.
I agree with you 150%.
He totally, for what he contributed to the game, unbelievable.
And when you go to the Hall of Fame, who's the first statue you see?
Buck O'Neil.
Buck O'Neil.
Right.
I mean, they acknowledge it.
Yeah.
They need to further acknowledge it.
They do. Even if just a contributor or whatever. Forget that he was a great ball player, manager, ambassador for the game, for both Negro leagues and white baseball, like both, right? He was just an ambassador. He just loved baseball, period. No matter who was playing it, what color their skin was, it didn't matter. He just appreciated and respected the game and the people doing it. Amazing guy. So
I couldn't agree more. You could probably, by the way, and I know you probably have seen this, but one of my favorite Negro League documentaries is called Only the Ball Was White. And you can look it up on YouTube. The gentleman who posted it only has 500 subscribers, but has all these interviews it's probably made in the early 80s, late 70s. And it has all these interviews with all the guys that have long since gone that you've heard about,
Yeah, I've seen it. It is fantastic.
And it's not long. It's probably 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So back to the topic du jour. I apologize for getting us off on the Buck O'Neil tangent, but I think you're right a lot about that psychology, about the reading books about the game when I was young, and the history, and these, like you said, mythical figures of Clemente, and it creates something in me. It stirred up something in me that has been maintained to my 47th year on this planet. And I don't know that it'll go away. I don't want it to go away. I love it.
And to that, along with, why people got back into it, this is, I guess, is going piggybacking, is people got back into vintage because they were into it when they were younger, or vintage, or just sports cards in general. I talked to a young guy. He's probably, in his mid 30s, early 30s, and he was trying to buy some Hank Aaron cards off me because I listed some nice Hanks after he had passed, and these were duplicates. And I just, at a certain point, I realized, no, I don't want to sell these. But he contacted me about one of them and wanted to buy it off eBay. And we started talking, and he was a mortgage guy in California. And he was telling me, how he was out of it. And now he has a young son, and he's just trying to buy up as many Hank Aaron's and Willie Mays as he could, because his grandfather used to talk to him about those two guys all the time. And we had, an hour-long conversation, and he was a real nice young guy. And, it was cool what he was trying to do for his son. And he had said, I was in the, with the junk wax era, I was into it, and I got out of it, and I'm really happy to be getting back into it. Hopefully that his story is continuing, because, hopefully he didn't buy cards at inflated prices. But with guys like that, and this is why I say maybe the vintage market isn't crashing like some people seem to believe. If you're buying Hank Aaron's and Willie Mays's, you're going to be fine. Especially if they're nice ones, you're going to be fine. It's right. You might think, oh boy, I had a friend who bought my close friend here, Eric, in Arizona. He bought a Bob Gibson a 6.5, and this was a while ago, 3 years ago. And he accidentally bid too much on a pre-war auction, and he bought it for $1,100, and it was a 6.5, and it was $300 more than normal 6.5. And he's like, oh, I messed up. Well, he didn't want to get banned from bidding, so he ended up paying for the card and got it. It looks like an 8. I mean, it's a fantastic Gibby rookie. And now he's happy as a clam. He's happy as he's like, man, that card was, at the height of the market, that 6.5 probably can get you 2,500, maybe even 2,700. Now, it's probably worth whatever. It's worth 50% more than he paid for it, if he wants to sell it, which he's never going to, because he loves the card.
Right. Well, let's get into the meat of this to kind of show people, from my perspective, what I'm seeing. This is real data. I'm not making any of this stuff up. And I want to preface what I'm about to show, because I'm going to show a spreadsheet. George and I are going to disappear for a minute as I talk through this. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'll do my best to describe what we're looking at. If you're on YouTube, you'll obviously be able to see it. But this isn't meant to be a flex. I'm just showing some cards that I happen to look at that I didn't look at a lot of. I honestly looked at a bunch of higher end stuff, not low end stuff. Not because if you have a card that you bought for $50 and it's worth 30 now, it's only $20. It's still a large percentage drop, but I just kind of looked. I literally started at kind of the top of the value list in my cards. And this is in no way meant to be like a flex video, although some people will take it that way. These are just cards I own. So, it is what it is. So I got to get the glasses on now to be able to see this. So I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet that I did on just some cards that I was, looking at. I'm going to make this full screen so people can see better. And I just pulled up 15 cards that I own. And at the very top is the 51 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie. What I did was I went and looked at current value, kind of what the recent sales have been. Some of them were incredibly recent. Like I did this a few days ago. So I have some of them that were literally the day before or the day of that I did the research. Some of them, not all these cards sell every day in the grades that I have. And therefore the most recent sale is simply the most recent sale. So I have kind of that current value. I have the peak price. Like if you were just to get lucky and sell at the absolute, like be the highest sale of that card, when was that? What was the value? And then the difference between that peak price and the current value. And so I did it both in dollars and percentage difference. And you'll see, for example, on the 51 Bowman Mantle, I have a PSA 5 and it's currently valued at 30. The last one sold for $30,000. And at its peak though, just in March 5th, one sold for $55,100. That's a 45% decrease in a PSA 5 Mantle rookie. Now you could argue both ways. Either it was A, overvalued at the peak point, or B, way undervalued now. And I'm not going to try to make a case for either one of those. I'll go through some other cards. My 51.
Can I respond to that, Mike?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
I think we talked a little bit about this, but I'm not diminishing the peak value concept because it's really interesting to see peak value. But we're none of us, we're not going to sell it at peak value, right?
Unless you just get really lucky.
Unless you get you get super lucky, like, oh, I'm going to sell my house at the top of the housing boom or whatever. And for some of us, if I had a 51 Bowman Mantle, it might be more important to me than my house. I don't know. I'm just kidding, but. I think too, another thing about all of these cards that you've shown here, I'm looking at them all right now. Everything that you're showing here, except for the Trout and the PSA 10, is incredibly conditions, eye appeal, centering, registration, condition sensitive. And I think as I talked to you about before, your Mickey Mantle on a 5 is a super nice 5. I think it would be worth more than the current value of $30,000 because it's a nice 5 and they're hard to find. And I think you could apply that to anything that's vintage here. Obviously, the Trout rookie in a 10's a 10 practically, right?
Sure.
But I think that it's important to note, like whenever you look at sales of stuff, not you, but I mean the viewers, that like if you're looking at comps for the Bowman Mantle, or for example here the Mays and the PSA 2, you go down the grading scale here. And that, if you look at PSA 2s of Mays rookies, the last like 100 that have sold, they're all drastically different.
Right.
You might find, right. They could be, you have one that could look like a 5 or a 6, and you could have one where you're like, I can barely see his face. So
totally agree.
And that's just something I wanted to mention, obviously.
And, probably the best thing would have been to average these out or something. But I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel here. I was simply just looking at some things, and you're totally right about vintage, especially in that mid to lower grades. They're not all created equal. There are vast differences within even one grade of eye appeal and et cetera of a card. So and the values will reflect that, by the way. Totally. So I agree, but all things being equal, the prices are what they are. So
yeah,
I totally agree with you. And yet I still only have the data that I have. So the Mays rookie that I have, a PSA 2, peak price was 10,000, almost 10,500 back in April. It's now 5,200. So it's down half, 49.6%. My Gehrig card is only down 13%. And I put all these are vintage, except like you mentioned, I do have a Mike Trout on here just as a comparison to maybe a modern card, to say what if vintage is down this much, what's happening to quote unquote modern stuff, not necessarily even ultra modern, but the Trout rookie hit a peak back in February of $8,500. And now it's $3,400. That's 60% down. Hank Aaron rookies down 48%. Clemente rookies down 55%. Again, these are in the grades that I have. I didn't look at all Clementes. I didn't look at all Aarons because A, it would have taken a long time, and B, those grades don't matter to me. Those prices don't matter to me at all in terms of being interested in it, because these are the cards I have. So I'm interested in them and just have more kind of skin in the game, literally. Ernie Banks, not really down that much, about 6%. But the 53 tops Jackie Robinson and a PSA 4 down 50%. I know I keep rattling off numbers. The theme here is the total value, difference in the 15 cards that I looked at that I happen to own, cumulatively were down about 45%. Some more, some less, right? And I just think it's interesting. You see it's relatively consistent. There's some that are a little less in terms of how much they're down, but the reality is most of these cards are down 40 to 50%, and including Nolan Ryan rookies and non-rookies like 64 Mantle, 56 Ted Williams. Again, I just looked at some, I wouldn't call them random cards, just kind of some of these higher end cards that I happen to own that none of these I paid even close to even what the current value is, much less, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're doing okay still.
Yeah, I'm still just fine in terms of money in versus if I was having to sell money out. I'm not going to be in trouble here. But this relatively swift, we're talking 2 to 3 months that this market has shifted this much. By the way, not uncommon at all for markets in general of anything, for it to be the steeper the rise. Think of a rubber band, right? The harder you pull it, the more it's going to snap, right? And that happens in lots of markets, lots of things. The faster it goes up, the faster it'll come back down. I still don't think cards will end up. I think you're going to have this new level of high, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been like at the beginning when I was talking about how every March/February cards go up. That I've seen, vintage cards, baseball specifically, they go up and then they get a little high and they come back down, but they don't come back down to the pre-existing February. Right. And I can tell you, at least in my experience collecting Hank Aaron's, Willie Mays's, and Jackie Robinson's, that, I look back at the prices and I know I'm going to pay a little bit more this spring than last spring or whatever it is. Now, this year it's a big difference. I will tell you that the Satchel Paige, for example, and if there's any rebound or whatever, there was a PSA 2 Satchel Paige that last night pre-war went off, a PSA 2 for $1,100. So, you can figure out the math, but if a PSA 2 is $1,100, a PSA 5 at $2,700, which is the peak value, isn't out of the question, Right. Just kind of looking at these,
any of these stick out to you? Like any of them just really jump out to you? Are you surprised by any of them?
I'll tell you what, I'm surprised. First of all, I've got a couple opinions about this. I'm surprised that 33 Gowdy and 34 Gowdy Lou Gehrig cards have not gone up more. They have not seen the jump, in my opinion, that, some of the other people have, like Mays, Mantle, Ruth, for some reason. Even though they're beautiful cards. I mean, all of them, both 34s and all the 30 in the 33s. The Bowman Mays rookie, $10,000, $10,495 for a PSA 2 is a complete total outlier. That is out of control. So 5,000, a nice one, 5 to 5,000. I can see that. That makes sense. Trout rookies, we know that they went up. For some reason, they were at like $5,000, and in a couple of days, they were going for like 7,500, 8,000, and then they came back down really quickly. Him not playing probably plays into that a little bit. The Hank Aaron rookie.
Let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah, sure.
For the Mays, for example, the PSA 2 I bought at the National in 2019, I paid $1,600. So even if at $5, you know what I mean? I would argue that it was undervalued then.
Oh, absolutely. It was undervalued. I bought 2 of them.
Yeah. We're getting to more real, you know what I mean? It's, and I agree with you about Ruth and Gehrig. I also think DiMaggio stuff hasn't moved as much as I would have thought. And
I agree. DiMaggio and Gehrig stuff has moved, but not as much. And if it has moved significantly, it's like Ernie Banks as well, or Frank Robinson, or kind of. But Gehrig and DiMaggio are inner circle Hall of Famers. But right. I mean, the higher grade stuff, yes, it's moved up a lot. If you had a Ernie Banks rookie in a 7.5, it's going to go up, and it's not going to stay there forever, but it's going to stay up longer, and it's going to be more consistent. I just when we go down the grading scale, it's very important to have a good eye for what you're buying if you care about it maintaining and sustaining its value. You have to be careful. If you buy a Willie Mays and a 2, and I have a 2 as well, and I have a 2.5, and it just took me a long time to find the right one. But then while you're waiting to find the right lower grade Mays rookie, they start going up, and then you start getting FOMO, and you're just like, what do I do? And I think a lot of that has happened and did happen, especially in February and March of this year.
Well, I know you have some stories. I know you have some examples of cards from your collection that I had you do some of your own research on what's maybe happened to some of your key cards. You want to share some of that? Even some stories of cards you bought as recently as February that you were feeling a little FOMO about. I know one particular Lakers center that you bought his rookie card.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to piggyback off of Silver Jackify, because Joe did a video today about cards going up and down, and one of them he cited was the Lou Alcindor rookie card, and I did a video on it last night. Now, fortunately for me, I got in on the Alcindor in January.
Okay.
So I got a 3.5. I don't have it with me right here, but and I bought it off 4 sharp corners. There was no tax. That's helpful when it was like $1,700.
Right.
And I'm not saying that. I'm just giving numbers.
I know.
So
I get it.
Yeah. So that card went up into 3, and I was having fear that I was missing out. Even though I've been in the hobby for a long time, I figured I had to buy it now, and it went up, and now it's gone back down. It's worth still more than I bought it for. Joe had bought a 5. And I believe his story was it was a little bit later on in the process. So he was saying, with a percentage, it went down. Now, I guess what I'm saying here is that's also the difference here, too. And I want to make a difference between different sports. Right. Vintage basketball, for example. I do a lot of vintage basketball. Vintage basketball is, in my opinion, it's outstanding. It's criminally undervalued for a long time. But if the greatest players in basketball can fluctuate like this all the time, this isn't just now. Jordan stuff has fluctuated for a long time. If Jordan and Kareem, LeBron, if the greatest players in that sport are fluctuating and their rookie cards are fluctuating that much, then you have to understand that basketball is a much more scary roller coaster, so to speak. And we've seen it with the Jordan 86 Fleer rookie and stuff like that. But with vintage baseball, your numbers, if you take the numbers that you had given us, and even if if I try to minimize them, And I say, okay, well, it's not that bad. It's only gone down 30%, not 45 or 50. If I say it's gone down 30%, it's still a significant drop. But but baseball doesn't have this as big of a fluctuation, with the Hall of Famers, the Roos, Gehrig's, DiMaggio's, Williams. It doesn't fluctuate as much as that. So that's why I think another reason why people gravitate towards vintage baseball. It's nostalgia, it's all that. But stories about cards. I'm sorry, Mike.
Please, no, tell stories. I like it.
Well, I mean, like this was one I was having FOMO on. Let's see here. It was a Koufax rookie.
Koufax, yes.
And I got a 4, and ended up getting it for I think $1,000 or so. And it was, it was not the kind of 4 I wanted. A nicer, more. I had centered, but I wanted a nicer 4. But I'm like, I got to get in on this card. And am I going to sell it? No, I'm going to keep it. I'm in it for the long game anyway. I didn't have a Koufax rookie coming into 2020. Other cards.
So what's your Koufax? I mean, did you do any research on pricing?
I've been watching them, and they're kind of going. Well, again, I'm going to keep going back to this, but it's about the appeal of the card. In a 4, right. I mean, I bought a 3.5 3 days after I bought this 4 because the 3.5 had nicer centering and it looked better to me. If I was to sell one of these, I'd sell this one, not the 3.5.
Right.
And I, a lot of people say buy the card, not the grade. I mean, I think maybe the first person I heard say that was Eric, those back pages. Right. And I said, bingo, that guy knows what he's talking about. Well, the more I watched him, the more I realized that he's just a fountain of information. He's great. And he's, but I mean, that's, buy the card, not the grade. It doesn't matter. If you think it looks nice, it's going to call to you. Here's another story. I was out at the Long Beach show a couple of years ago. And when you see a card at a show and it just calls to you, you're like, that's the one. Right. And so I know you've had these experiences, maybe with a Mays rookie. And so I walked into that show and I'm like, okay, this card was there.
39 play ball, DiMaggio or Williams.
Yeah. Sorry. And I was wanting to get one of this card, probably in a lower grade, like a 2 or something like that. And then I saw this and I'm like, dude, I was my buddy. And I'm like, look at the centering, look at that card. And he's like, yeah, it's a 4.5 though. I'm like, I know. So I brought a bunch of cards to trade. And I ended up working a deal with one dealer I sold some cards to. The dealer had this, I ended up trading. But what I'm saying is that's again, that nostalgia, or you just know it when you see it. It didn't have to be a 4.5. It could have been a 1. It could have been, at a certain point you're priced out, obviously. I'll take cards to shows. I'll take some nicer cards to shows to trade, because I think that, if you bring nice stuff, the dealers know it and they're going to give you a higher price. I was getting probably 75% VCP on my trades. And I figured, well, boy, if I sell it on eBay, I'm only getting 86% anyway. And it takes time. And I need to get this deal done now because in 15 minutes, some guy's going to walk up and buy it. So, that's from the show.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I bought a 48 leaf Ruth at the Dallas show a couple weeks ago. And
you and Josh,
me and Josh, rated rookie, my buddy, we did that. And point being, I was debating between that card and a 53 Bowman color mantle, both of which about the same price point in terms of, I was looking at, I can't remember what grades, different grades actually for mantles, but there were tons of them there. Relatively speaking, there were 2 Babe Ruths at the entire show. We're talking about probably the second largest sports card show in the country. And there were 2 of them. And it's been a holy grail card for me for a long time. And I was the sad thing is, and I realize this now as I sit here weeks later, a lot of people have buyer's remorse. I had buyers, thank God I bought that card, because I got, I think, a really good deal for it. Price wise, it was really speaking to me, and I can get a 53 Bowman color mantle whenever I want. They're scarce relative to a Fernando Tatis rookie in a 10, but not scarce in the vintage world. They're not scarce. Certainly Mantle has been something that's appreciated greatly in the boom. But that Ruth card was just something like, golly, I really, really think I should get this. And after the fact, many guys were telling me, you made the right decision. As I told them the story, you made the right call getting the Ruth. Mine's a PSA 1. But I love it. I bought the card, not the grade.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, I made a good choice because it spoke to me that way. But the sad thing is I debated it. I literally slept on it and was trying to decide what I want to do. I look back now and go, that shouldn't have even been a thought. Like it should have been a no-brainer. Maybe that was just a moment or whatever, but
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that this is kind of the way I've tried to collect. Since I got back into it, I learned more. You learn more. When did you start with the graded cards, Mike? Do you remember?
Yeah, 2010.
Okay, yeah. So when I first got back to in 2005, I was buying off-center stuff. I was buying stuff that it just didn't look very good or whatever. I was just buying the grade. I was like, oh, that's an 8. And it's an 8 and it looks like it's miscut, but it's in a regular 8 holder with no qualifiers. And I'm like, anyway. So then I started to learn more about this and I started to learn about the pop report. And so about 2 or 3 years into it, it's a free, the free pop report. And everybody knows about this now, but I'm like looking at this thinking, well, how many of these are there out there? How many, what kind of cards? Like when I was a kid, my grandfather got me this. It's Burt Randolph Sugar Book. I know you're familiar with it, right? It's awesome.
Love it. Yes.
And you think to yourself, well, how many of certain cards are out there? Well, if I'm going to buy these guys,
right,
in real cards, yeah. I mean, I've been looking for a branch Ricky, Cracker Jack forever, and I can't find one that's I can't fit the bill. I mean, It's super rare. Now, if I wanted to buy myself a 56 Mantle, that would be great, and I'd pay probably the same amount of money. And I could find one. How many can we find on eBay right now? I mean, and I understand that there's, if there's a 7.5 or an 8.5, it's an amazing card. I can't even find a Branch Rickey that's not beat to hell over the last 5 years. So, you just kind of, that's the collector, I guess. I'm looking for rarer stuff. And, you can come back later and get that 53 Bowman Mantle that you were talking about, which is it's a wonderful card. But that Babe Ruth, I mean, I think there's probably 1,000 maybe total by PSA, 1,000 Ruths graded total.
Right.
There's not that much. And I guess to my point, like, for example, this is a nice 73 Clemente and it's in an 8 and that's great. It's not super rare. There's a lot of 8s. Matter of fact, there might be like 1,000 8s. And then, this card, there's 1,000 total of these. I mean, I'm not counting SGC, but I mean, if you have a chance to
showing Satchel Paige rookie 49 Bowman, just you have to remember people are going to be listening to this on a podcast, so you have to be more descriptive.
Yeah, okay. If I guess, yeah. So I mean, if I'm going to get a Satch Bowman rookie, it's just more rare, and you can't find them. You can't find them centered. The lower the grade, the more difficult it is. And again,
I can't see the grade on that card. Put it back up. I want to.
Oh, it's a 3.
Well, but I would look at that card and say that's much nicer than a 3, because when you hold it at arm's length and it blurs out the flip, you just look at the card and you go, man, that's a gorgeous Satch rookie. Yeah, and I would have said that's a 5 or something, and you tell me it's a 3. I'm like, wow. Okay, I'd take that out every day of the week.
Well, so thank you. I think that this is part of the values and how the values are calculated. And specifically, just to go back to the Mays rookie, I was looking for one as well, and I happened to come across 2 of them in like 2 months from each other. But it's like I was looking at them in 2s, like you bought yours, and I looked at like 100 on the PSA site, and I pulled up all the pictures of these 2s, and they were all drastically different. If you look at the 8s, there may only be 10 sold, but they're all pretty good. Right. So if you want to get into that game, you have to take time to look and get the right one, I think.
For sure. By the way, that paged card that you just showed, the 49 Bowman, has been, let's just say I'm being encouraged by one of the people I really respect in this hobby, Dave Blue Jacket 66, to buy that card at the National, to be that he wants that to be my, because at the National, I try to buy a big boy card, kind of one of those Grail cards, just to say, like, I can tell you all my big cards, where I bought them and who I was with and the experience that I had buying it. Because that's part of enjoying the card. I bought it on eBay. Okay, great. Right? That doesn't seem to have nearly as much, memory / meaning as my Hank Aaron rookie that I bought in a 3 with Eric, those back pages, your good friend and mine, walking around the National and looking at probably 80 to 100 of them in various grades and finding that one and going, that's the best looking 3 I've ever seen.
There you go. I mean, that's, you got to look. Like, I don't have a Clemente rookie. I should have bought one last May. I had a chance to. I passed. I mean, literally, it was like $50 apart, and I was trying to. I made a mistake, but anyway. I mean, like, I was trying to. Hey, my dad's an immigrant. They say he still has money from his baptism left. Right. I don't know. Seriously though, I should have bought it, but I'm like, another one will come up because there's so many of them. But they're hard to find. 55 that's centered or looks nice, has good color, isn't faded out, isn't creased, whatever. It's hard to find, and unless you're going to buy a 6 or something, which is a lot, is a big bill. Yeah,
it's funny. I think we're like poker players. If you have that collector mindset, because poker players they can't tell you the big hands they won, but they can tell you the bad beats all day long. That's a quote from Rounders, the movie, and it's true. And I will tell you, the whole thing with the 53 Bowman Mantle for me too just keeps coming back, because in 2014 I was at the baseball card exchange booth at the National, and I could have bought a PSA 5 for $150, and I was like, I'll buy something else, And I remember I could literally walk to where that card. I could walk to the Cleveland Center. I could show you where their booth was, and I could walk to where that card was and show you where it was. And I passed on it. And I remember that I can tell you all the detail. I can't tell you a lot of details on hundreds of other cards that I bought over the years, but I can remember the ones that got away.
Yeah, this is like old fisherman drinking stories. The one that got away. It's like, I imagine at the National, everybody would be sitting there and like you're drinking and hanging out, and it's like, I could have got this Jackie Robinson Leaf rookie. I could have got this 33 Gowdy Ruth. And it's like you think about all those things that you missed out on and don't really reflect so much on the fact that you've made a lot of hopefully good investments. I know you have in the cards and over the years. I mean, I think it's just with vintage, it's just a long game. And when I got back into it, I started thinking, I'm gonna get cards graded. I'm gonna buy boxes of old cards. I can get a 1979 Nolan Ryan and a PSA 10. That's easy. And then I bought a couple boxes of 79 Topps, and I submitted a bunch of cards, and I got 110 out of like 200 cards because I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
And then I started thinking, well, I'll just buy, Mantles or which I couldn't really afford, or Robinsons, and start flipping them. Yeah, you're not going to make money doing that either. It's a long game. And so, you're amazed. Go ahead. No, you finish your thought, and then I'll ask I want to kind of tie the bow on this a little bit. Yeah. So I was just, and I just want to talk about this because I just didn't, with it being a long game, I kind of wrote some stuff down about kind of like the vintage collector, and I'm not even saying I know we've been talking a lot about PSA graded cards, and I don't want to leave the collectors of raw cards out. There's a lot of people like Ticket Leprechaun Jake and a lot of other, people that in our community that collect raw vintage cards, and they could care less about grading. But and I think that, that just the vintage collector is just different. The vintage collector mindset, they're typically a little bit older, or like Jake, maybe they're younger but wiser. Right. And they are just, they understand it's a long game. They understand that they're collecting History. They're collecting memories. They have an affinity for a certain card. Remember who, maybe they saw it in the Sandlot, the 1962 Topps card they saw in the Sandlot, whatever it is, so, I mean, whether it's graded cards, it's like you get your graded cards and that's great. But I have a raw Brooks Robinson. This is an 864 Brooks Robinson and an 8, and that's great. I have a raw one that's on my wall that I got when I was 10, and it means more to me than this PSA 8. So, I just think that there's a attitude about collecting vintage, and I think that's why we're all kind of like certainly not all the same, but we all have some kind of love, passion for the past. We appreciate it. We think about it. We let it kind of marinate, and I think that's common among most vintage collectors.
Yeah, there's a
raw or graded.
A lot of common threads among vintage collectors in the way we think, and which is very, very cool. So given what I've shown, the evidence that I've presented in terms of just some values of cards that I own and what they've done just over the last few months in terms of the crash. Is there a crash? Isn't there a crash? Make up your own mind on what you think. I think there is. I don't think that's a bad thing. What do you think as a vintage collector? What does the future hold in your mind in the vintage market?
Well, the first thing we have to understand, like Will Rogers said about land, is they're not making any more of these vintage cards, right? So, I mean, like, when you go out and you go to the National and you find the right 49 Bowman Satchel Paige, you're going to be happy as a clam that you got it, because there aren't many of them out there. I think that vintage is strong. It will be strong. I mean, again, I'm watching auctions last night and I know it's pre-war, and for whatever, I don't buy too many pre-war cards. But the prices, the values are strong in a lot of these high-end Hall of Famers still. I watched a Ted Williams rookie in a PSA 6 49 play ball a PSA 6 went for $10,500. That's strong money. Now, if you long for the fact that you want it to be like last February, then you're going to have to hold on to your cards and wait till next February, because it's going down a little bit, and it's gone. I'm buying into the fact that it's gone down, but I'm not buying into the fact that it's 50% down on nice examples of Mickey Mantle rookie cards. And I think if you were to try to sell yours, I'm sure that you would get more than what you say it's worth now, because it's a nice one. So I would just going to I have altered my collecting to some degree. I'm focusing on a few different players. But, I think that if you stay with it, I think you can't go wrong in the long term. So if we talk a year from now and what's your Hank Aaron rookie in a 3? Yeah. If that 3 is at $500, then we'll have to do another podcast, because it has been a complete crash.
Right.
But that's, if the Hank Aaron rookie in a PSA 3 is at $500, we've got bigger economic problems.
Good point. And I look at it again as a collector. Great. It's like everything's on sale, and they rang the bell. Everything's on sale. What I just hope is, say, the National that's coming up in about 6 weeks, will the dealers get the message that everything's on sale? Will they know that everything's on sale and the prices reflect that in the showcases? Time will tell. I can't answer that question yet. I'll be able to answer it in about 6.5 weeks when I can tell you what I'm seeing there. I sure hope that if prices continue to come down, again, that to me just screams buying opportunity. I don't go, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, I've got to get out and fire sale dump my cards. I'm looking at it as great. Just more stuff I can buy for the same amount of money. Yay, me, right? And I think most collectors would look at it that way too. No, I just think most collectors would view what's going on right now in the same vein.
Yeah, I'm not stopping.
Right.
I mean, it's not like, I work for the government. I'm a public employee. Okay. So I don't have a ton of, disposable income, but I try to buy what I can buy. And I just going to keep, again, you find nice cards. that are, and I don't care about, I mean, I prefer it to be a PSA, it could be SGC. I was just showing you a card I bought last night, and you were showing me a card. You know, you bought a Campanella and I bought Adobe, and you know, it's not going to deter us if the card is nice. And again, you know it when you see it. You know, you'll know it when you see it, whatever you're looking for. I'm not going to the National. I wish I was, but I live in Phoenix, so I'm kind of far away, and I'm just going to sit out here and roast in the heat. But I really believe, like, when you see it, whatever you're looking for, you'll know it at the National. And my hope is that these dealers are not going to use the words, well, I'm into it for X.
Right.
I can't do that. I think you're going to hear a lot of this. They're going to talk about the boom and how they didn't have any inventory and they sold it all off, which means they made a bunch of money. And then they have been having to replenish their inventory. And so they have to buy at higher prices, and I'm in it for this much. I just, you know, but we know, I mean, you look at your phones, you go to shows now, everybody's looking at VCP or whatever PSA site on their phone. And, you know, as long as you can show their real sales, I think the dealers got to listen, unless they want to, you know, move their inventory and these opportunity costs. I mean, you're not at the National to not sell cards, are you? I mean, you're not at the National having a booth because you're like, hey, look at my collection. You know, you want to, they want to sell it. I mean, you have, but sometimes you have to talk these people into it, and you have to be aggressive with them. I know you bought yourself a nice Campy rookie at the Dallas show, right?
I did.
And you had some help from people that, you know, and, you know, I helped a friend of mine buy a 60 Hank Aaron at a show in a 7, and I had to show my 60 Hank to the dealer saying, mine's nicer than yours, and I paid this much, and it's lower, so you need to lower your price. I mean, like, they're there to sell cards, and they need to remember that. So there's my psychology in that.
No, it's totally true. And I hear it all the time. Well, I'm into it for this. And my immediate internal response, I never vocalize this as much as I would love to, but it'd just be kind of a dick move. But like, that's not my problem. Like, that you're into it that much. That's not my fault.
I'll say it.
There's always, like, you know, again, they're trying to sell it for as much as they can. I'm trying to buy it for as cheap as I can. Hopefully there's somewhere in the middle that makes sense for both of us. But I'm not going to overpay. I'll walk down this again. None of these are one of ones, right? They may be rare, but at the same time, they're not the only ones out there. And you have to be patient. If I tell any vintage collector, be patient.
I think that's true. Unless you're like, a couple years ago, I remember a great video, and you were at the show with Nuff Said Cards, right?
Yep.
And the very first day, he bought a Cracker Jack Tris speaker.
He did.
One of the great images, iconic images in baseball history. It's a fantastic card.
Yes.
I wish I had one. And it's just, he said, I planned to like hold off, but I saw this card and I had to have it. That kind of card, you're going to find like 2 a show if you're lucky. So yeah, I mean, if you have to know what you're looking for and know how rare it is. You know, if I'm looking for an 83 Donruss Tony Gwynn and a 10, and I love Tony Gwynn. Oh man, I love Tony Gwynn. But boy, these cards aren't rare, and I can, you know. So I mean, but if you're looking for something that's a lot more rare, like this is a blue tint Jackie Robinson 1949. Low pop card, strip card. You know, that's what I'm saying. You have to understand. I know you understand this, but you know, understand what you're looking for, develop your strategy, get your boys together, get in there and get what you need.
Your collection's insane, by the way, George, just so you know.
Well, yours is too, Mike. I mean, I'm not going to show us yours. I actually don't have a spreadsheet. This sounds messed up, but I just don't have a spreadsheet because I'm like, it's disorganized. It's organized chaos, I guess.
Well, tell everybody, you know, before I let you go, how they can find you in social media world. Tell them where they can find Diamond Yard Sports Cards.
Well, I'm only on YouTube at Diamond Yard Sports Cards, and I've been on for about 4 years and enjoying it, having a lot of fun, meeting a lot of great people throughout the country. I just talked to Don's Field of Dreams Cards today, and Chuck Northside guy, just a great group of guys. And I, you know, can't say enough about the community. Wish I could go to the National. Hopefully that will happen next year. But I saw Jake Ticket Leprechaun recently. He came out here to Arizona to go to the Diamondbacks game, even though they're the worst team in baseball. But
the Rangers are giving them a run for their money. Don't worry.
Yeah, Don said the Pirates are too. So
yeah.
But I can be emailed at azdiamondyard@gmail.com. I'm, love to interact with anybody in the community. I haven't really done much trading with people, but I'm open to that. But just love to hear your thoughts, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I have had a real good time, Mike, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, an hour goes really quick when you start just getting into the stuff, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, this has been great. So yeah, we could just rap for a long time,
and we will. Believe me, once I hit stop record, we're probably going to talk for a little while longer. But for everybody out there that's listening, watching, again, thanks so much for being a part of the show. Go out there, leave a comment on the YouTube video. We'd love to hear from you. George will be watching the comments too and responding if you have a comment for George. And I'll put a link in the YouTube video down to his channel, as well as if you're on a podcast, on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, go give us a review. Go give Golden Age of Cardboard a review. That just helps other people that might be looking for sports card content find it in the podcast world. And so that's it.
And I just want to say, guys, and I know everybody knows this, but all the positivity that you get and you get out of the community, pay it forward to fellow collectors.
Amen to that. It's a great thing to end on. Thanks, George, again for being here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Have a good one. And no matter what prices are doing, keep collecting.